We're going to talk about factor markets today. So this is a new side of microeconomics. We've been focusing on the first 3 units. We focused on the product market. What's being produced and how much, determining how much we produce and how much it costs, what the price should be, and that type of thing. Factor markets deals with the factors that make the product. And that's a market within itself. The most common one thought of is workers, right? Workers are a factor in production. They produce. And their wage is the price of that market, and the quantity is the number of people employed. Okay, so, factor markets is a different look at another aspect of the market. So factors of production. There are 3 common factors of production that you think about in economics. Anybody know what they are? They all begin with, well, 2 of them begin with L, one of them with C. Labor is one. Land is another. Capital. Land, labor, and capital. You probably have heard that before. All right, so the factors of production, inputs used to produce goods and services, and land, labor, and capital. Capital has a number of different meanings. In this context, it means equipment and structures, right? So if I own a factory, all the machines I use to make my goods and the building that I rent or own, that's my capital, okay? In some cases, capital is thought of as like money, the money supply somebody has. The financial aspect of it. But in this case, it's equipment and structures. Derived demand. Derived demand is the concept of a firm's demand for a factor production is derived from its decision to supply a good in another market. Okay, so what this is saying, don't make it more complicated than it is what happens, it's saying what happens in the product market affects demand in the factor market, right? If prices of something in the product market go up, okay, what do you think is going to happen to demand for a factor in the factor market? It's going to go up, right? If the demand, the supply of, supply increases, supply of some product increases in the perfectly competitive market. A lot of people are producing it, right? Then, the supply curve shift would cause price to go down, quantity to go up in the product market. So then, if the price of something goes down, then the demand for the factor may be less. All right? So, anyways, just the changes, the shifts in the product market affect the factor market. Graphs of the product market and the factor market for apples. Okay. So we've got here let's compare the product market to the factor market. We've got the market for apples, and so we would have quantity of apples, the price of apples, and we would have a supply-demand graph. Demand curve, supply curve, that determines price and quantity, right? Here's our P star, here's our Q star. Right? Then we got we also, if there's a market for apples, then there's going to be a market for apple pickers. So our market for apple pickers. Now we've got quantity, but we're going to say quantity of labor to distinguish. Okay, so when you label the quantity line in the market, the factor market, say quantity of labor or quantity of capital or quantity of land. And then since this is labor, instead of saying price, we're going to say wage. Right? So then, but it's still, the market is still a supply-demand graph. Right? And this would be QL1, and this would, or QL star, and this would be wage star. Right? So, no different. It's a supply-demand graph, just different on how you label your axes. Right. Any questions on those two graphs? Does everybody have them? All right. Okay, looking at this, I can see I said that wrong about that example. If the supply in the market for apples increased, supply of apples increases. Okay, that's going to decrease. Let's see, that decreases the price. So that would cause the demand for apple pickers. If the price goes down, I think their demand is going to go down. So the wage would go down and the quantity of labor would go down. We'll do some more of those examples later. All right, so competitive profit maximizing firm in the factor market. The firm is a price taker in what it sells its product for and what it pays laborers. All right. Firm is a price taker in what it sells its product for and what it pays. There's so many people in the market, so many companies in the market, and there's so many people that are willing to be employees, then they have to be a price taker. Firm is profit maximizing. Its supply produced and number of workers hired are derived from maximizing profit. That's always the goal. Okay? You are not going to hire people unless they can cause you to maximize profit. Unless you're the U.S. government. Okay, does everybody have that? Everybody has it. All right. Profit maximizing in the factor market. Firm always considers profit when deciding how many workers to hire. And, I went too fast there. Profit maximizing in the factor market. Make a note of that. We got it? All right, now the next slide. Diminishing marginal product. What does that concept, what does that mean? What's diminishing marginal product tell us? We've talked about this before. Anybody remember what this concept is? Diminishing marginal product. Yes. Okay, it's not necessarily a lack of resources, but yeah, as you add workers, the marginal contribution of each worker gets smaller, right? Diminishing marginal product, textbook definition. The property whereby the marginal product of an input declines as the quantity of the input increases and other inputs are held constant. Does everybody have this definition? Raise your hand if you're not ready to go on. Marginal product of labor. Here's a new one. MPL. It's abbreviated MPL. The marginal product of labor. What do you think this is? The marginal product of labor. Yes, Zach.
The increase in product from adding on more work.
Right. The increase in the amount of output from an additional unit of labor. MPL, marginal product of labor. Increase in the amount of output from an additional unit of labor. Everybody got it? All right. Marginal revenue product. Now, it can be confusing because the book calls this the value of the marginal product. So kind of equate revenue and value, they kind of mean the same thing. So that's why there's two different ways to describe it. But the AP exam refers to this as MRP, marginal revenue product. So that's how we're going to define it. But if you see a homework question or you're reading the book and they talk about value of marginal product, you've got to think in your head, okay, they're talking about MRP, marginal revenue product. Definition, okay, it's a math equation. The marginal product of an input times the price of the output. Marginal revenue product equals, well, let's write it. We can write that. Marginal revenue product should equal MRP. MRP. Make sure you write this in the note. I should have had this in the PowerPoint. MRP equals the MP times P. If you can remember that equation, you can answer almost any question they ask you about MRP. It's going to be related to this. Does MRP go up if the price of a good goes up? This goes up? Yes, that goes up. What happens to MRP if the marginal product of the workers decreases? Yeah, MRP is going to go down. Okay? That's the type of question they're going to ask you about MRP. Marginal factor cost, MFC. The cost of hiring one additional input, in most cases, that's a worker. In most of our examples, that'll be a worker. So the MFC more commonly is referred to as the wage. Right? The marginal factor cost is the wage. Questions? Does everybody have it? All right. The marginal factor cost, just like price in the product market, the marginal factor cost in a perfect computer market stays constant because the firm is a wage taker. So marginal factor cost behaves like price in the product market. Stays constant. Everybody have it? All right. Graph of a firm in the factor markets. All right, we've got, graph of the firm in the factor market. You're going to have quantity of labor, Q of L, and then we're going to call this could be MRP, but we're going to call it wage. All right, we'll call this axis, instead of price, we'll call it wage. All right? And this is for the firm. Remember, this is for the firm, not the market. We already did the market. It's just a supply-demand graph. For the firm, we've got the horizontal MFC, which is wage. So we're going to label the axis wage, and we're going to call this curve MFC, marginal factor cost. Right? And then the MRP is our other graph curve. It's MRP, marginal revenue product. It's downward sloping. All right? It serves as the demand curve. Demand curve for labor. The MRP. You don't have to write that every time. I just wrote that in for you to know. All you need to put is MRP. Okay? Then that's just a little note. Demand curve for labor. Okay, where they cross is going to determine how many workers are hired. Now, please learn this graph, review this graph. I don't know why, but students have a mental block on the graph of the firm in the factor market. It is a very simple graph. Downward sloping MRP, horizontal MFC. It never fails. On the unit test, 50%, more than 50% of the people, 75% of the people will not get this graph. It's about as easy as they come. Except for supply and demand, where you know it's just an X. This is a downward sloping line and a horizontal line for the firm. Learn it and remember it. Don't miss it. It will be on the unit exam. It's an easy graph. Okay? And I know if you don't know it for the unit exam, you're probably going to miss it on the AP exam. And they're going to ask a question about this. So make sure you understand this graph. All right. Notes for the graph. Profit maximization. In product market, we have MR equals MC. And the factor market, we have MRP equals MFC. All right. That's where profit maximization, where those curves crossed, that's where the firm is going to produce. MRP equals MFC. The MRP, marginal revenue product, slopes down because the marginal product of labor diminishes as the number of workers rises. That's our principle of diminishing marginal product that we defined earlier. That downward sloping curve illustrates that. Okay, that's why it's going to slope downward. Okay, I have it? Okay. The marginal MRP curve is the demand curve for labor because the quantity of labor hired depends on the profit maximizing quantity as determined by MRP. MFC is straight across, right? So it's not going to be the thing that determines labor. The MRP is changing as quantity of labor hired increases, right? So where it's going to determine where it crosses MFC, that determines how much labor we hire. So it is the demand curve for labor. All right, everybody have it? All right. We're going to stop here for a second. Okay, we'll stop here.